Hello, welcome. It's good to be with you. My name is Matthew J. Pereira, and today I have the privilege of sharing with you my reflections on participating in what's known as the I-talki challenge. To do that, allow me to make it a little bit better by sharing slides with you, because I'm going to share stories to kind of express my own kind of thoughts related to questions which I was provided in order to kind of make it less about looking at my face and more about maybe bringing in story, which I think will be better for each of us. So let me give me 1 second here. I'm going to share my screen with you right here. There we go. Let me make it a little bit bigger for you. And let's see, 1 second. And of course, like each of you, I wish we could be doing this in person, but maybe next year it will be back to doing things more in person. That will be the hope. So, okay, great, here we go. So today's talk is how and why I decided to take 262 hours of lessons in the I-talki language challenge. And again, my name is Matthew J. Pereira, and it's a pleasure to be with you, albeit in this format of online. So the first question that was given to me, and I think it's an important question to address, it's a question that each of us thinks about, is what motivates us to give up so much time, energy, effort into learning a new language? This is a very important question. So why did I decide to learn Spanish? Each of us has our personal answers to this question. What motivates us, what keeps us going when progress slows down? That's important. It's important to have motivation. And for me, ultimately, if I'm being honest, it's a family thing. My grandparents and my mother, and here's an image, a photo of my grandfather, and I happen to be on his lap on the left. There's my little brother, Andrew, in the middle, and there's my grandmother. And then on the far right, that's my older brother, Brian, taken in the 1970s. My grandfather and my grandmother and my mother are from Puerto Rico. They came to Los Angeles, California, the United States, when my mother was 13 years old. And so I grew up in a household where Spanish was spoken around me, but never really to me. It was just kind of household. So I've always had this kind of connection to the Spanish language, even though I didn't speak it until recently. My connection to Puerto Rico goes back to, well, my family being from Puerto Rico, but also it goes back to my first flight, which I remember fondly. I was 8 years old. My older brother, Brian, and I, and my grandparents, we took flight to Puerto Rico to visit our family, a family who lived in San Juan. This is an image of San Juan here, but also in a farming community more inland known as Utuado. And I will talk about that towards the end of our conversation today. In fact, right now, I have the privilege of giving this talk from San Juan, Puerto Rico. I just started my vacation. We'll talk about that more a little bit towards the end as we wrap up things. Just one more image. I enjoy sharing this image because it really narrates through image, through photography, my close relationship to my grandfather who passed a while now. It's been about 15 years since my grandfather passed. But here on the left is an image of my brother Andrew and I both leaning in upon my grandfather. And on the right, I'm probably about 15 years older. And again, this is at the San Diego Zoo in California. I'm leaning in upon my grandfather. It's a metaphor for just kind of close relationship that I enjoyed with my grandfather throughout our time together until he passed. Here, he's wearing a hat, a very cool hat, by the way. And you can see there's a patch on it. I know the image is hard to make out, but that patch has a palm tree and maybe a boat, and it says Puerto Rico. And so Puerto Rico and the Spanish language that comes with it has always been a part of my family. And it's something that I do identify with. And so why learn Spanish in my mid-40s? It's a family thing that has motivated me from the beginning, and it continues to motivate me up to the present. So prior to I-talki, because the second half of this talk, I'm going to talk about I-talki and why I took the I-talki challenge. I would like to talk a little bit about my language study prior to my time on I-talki over the last 2 years and leading up to the I-talki challenge. So really, I grew up in a household, again, where we spoke English. However, when my mother and my grandparents were together, they spoke Spanish. And so that was around me, and it kind of enveloped me, and it kind of brought me comfort. But when it comes to my own language learning, it was rather shallow. It was rather weak, I would have to say. Prior to my studies in my first master's degree program. So I'm an undergrad at University of Washington. Here's an image of the cherry blossoms and what's known as the quad, an aerial view. It's beautiful during the spring when these cherries blossom. I took maybe 1 semester or 1 year of Spanish, and I think I learned about nothing. It was in the classroom, the traditional classroom. I walked away not knowing no more than maybe como estás, and that some words are feminine and some are masculine, and not much more. It wasn't a very effective way, at least for me, to learn a language. After the University of Washington, I attended seminary, 2 seminaries. The first was Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena. And in seminary is when I first really got more interested in language, but these are languages that I did not speak. The first language I became interested in was known as Koine Greek, which is the Greek of the New Testament. And it was solely for the purpose of reading and for translating and for being able to teach the Greek language, which is the language of, again, the New Testament coming out of the Christian tradition. In addition to Greek, I spent less time, but we spent a year or 2 with another teacher, Dr. Pamela Scalise, spending some time learning Hebrew as well. I was not a master in Hebrew, nor was I a master in Greek, but it was during this time that I first became more interested, more attracted to, more invigorated by the possibility of learning other languages outside of the English language, my native tongue. From Fuller Theological Seminary, I went on to study more at another seminary, Union Theological Seminary in New York City, where I continued studying Greek, and eventually I'd be studying Latin. And then I'd go on to Columbia University, and it's at Columbia University in New York City is where I did my PhD in the Department of Religion. And when I was there, I studied Latin. A lot of my dissertation is based on Latin texts, some which have not been translated until we arrive at my dissertation. And I have spent time in classes and in independent lessons, learning how to read and work with the Latin texts as well. So while I grew up only knowing English, eventually by the time I got to graduate school, I became more interested in trying to understand languages. But it was always in the context of the written text. So whether it be Latin, the Greek, or a little bit of Hebrew, it was always in written form, never in spoken form. So in some ways it was kind of dead, right? There were 2 languages I did have to pass exams in when I was at Columbia University, and these were both for the purposes of being able to use these languages, again, in the form of written text, simply being able to translate, say, a journal article, and be able to use that article for your own research is an important task on the doctoral level. So at the university, we had to pass exams, reading exams of German, which no, I did not speak. I do not speak German, and in France, which no, I do not speak. I do not speak French. But I spent a year or 2 to classes, had independent kind of tutoring as well, learning how to read and translate both German and French. Still, throughout all this time, when I was learning, going back to seminary, when I was learning Greek and Hebrew, and then back into graduate school at Columbia University, when I was doing Latin and learning how to understand and translate some French and German. All this time, I did not touch Spanish. Spent very little time, although in the back of my head, I was wanting to study Spanish, but it wasn't a language I had to have for my PhD. Or really it was not a language that's emphasis in the body of research, contemporary research around my area of focus. And so it kind of remained on the back burner for years, for decades. I spent about 20 years in higher education, earning my undergraduate and the master's degrees and PhD. And all along the way, there was always a part of me that wanted to learn Spanish, going back to my family roots. Here, when I was in New York, just to share, I was blessed to become acquainted for the first time, and I was in my 30s at this point, with my Puerto Rican family in New York City, the Nuyorican. These are my cousins. You have my cousin here, my cousin Georgie, my cousin Cinia. This was on a special weekend. Cinia is the daughter of Georgie when she graduated from college. It's my cousin Roy. And the guy in the far right, that's not a cousin, but we'll call him a cousin. He's like the family friend who's always there. So he might as well be a cousin. His name's LaRue. Interesting thing, also there's other cousins who I met over the 7 years in New York City, spent Christmases with them, spent other holidays, spent graduations with them, special event days with them, or just any day with them. My TT Mary, my great aunt Mary, who's the sister of my grandmother, Ileana, who lives in Los Angeles. Got to spend time with her as well. And all of them spoke Spanish. Besides LaRue, all of them spoke Spanish. And again, just like that connection to my family and the connection to the language is something that's always kind of been there. Then after Columbia University, I went back home to Los Angeles and I taught at Loyola Marymount University for 6 years. During this time, I wanted to learn Spanish, but I was busy. Or that was my excuse. We're always busy, but I was busy doing other things, primarily teaching and involved in other activities, and I just didn't make it a priority. So it kind of just sat back a little bit. And then came a moment where I decided I wanted to start actually learning Spanish. It happened in my 40s. And at the point, I was living with my grandmother. I was recently divorced, and after a 20-year marriage, I was planning on moving to Oklahoma to teach at Oklahoma State University in religious studies, and that's where I am now. That's where I teach now. And it was during this time, for 6 months, I lived with my grandmother. Here you see my grandmother. This is at one of our favorite restaurants in Redondo Beach, California. I'm on the far left. There's Andrew, no longer a baby, now a full-grown man in the middle. Those are Andrew's two children, Nikki and Elena. By the way, Andrew speaks Italian because he married an Italian woman in Rome, and these are his two children who are bilingual themselves. Andrew's done an excellent job teaching them English. They speak Italian and English. On the far right is my brother, Brian. And during this time is when I learned about I-talki. I first started learning Spanish the way a lot of people start learning Spanish, through using different applications on, you could get on your phone, or you could maybe use in other ways. That was basically how I was doing my Spanish learning. It was not interactive, meaning it didn't involve another person. It was automated. So whatever, these different programs one could use, I was doing that kind of stuff. That has its value. I'm not going to dismiss the value one could get out of these ways of practicing, but I knew I would need something more. And I remember I was sitting in bed in my room at my grandmother's home, and I was probably eating cookies in bed, which always annoys my grandmother. But anyhow, and I came across, I wanted to have conversations with people in Spanish. And so I looked online and for a community group in my area that was doing conversation in Spanish, but that made me nervous because I knew I couldn't really speak Spanish, even though at this point, from using these applications, I could maybe, rattle off some conjugations and so forth fairly well, because I stuck with them, but I knew I couldn't speak Spanish. So it made me nervous. And when I was looking on this discussion board, someone mentioned you could take lessons one-on-one from the privacy of your own home without the embarrassment of being in a group. And the company was called I-talki. So the next day I signed up for my first lesson. And that's how I found out about I-talki. I was interested in branching out from just kind of studying Spanish on my own to being interactive with it. So I took my first lesson of I-talki in June of 2019. And the first lesson, it just wasn't a good match, I didn't think. And so I took another lesson with another teacher, and that was a good match. My first 100 lessons were with one teacher and one teacher alone, simply because I was too shy to want to talk to any more than one person. I have a lot of anxiety around, speaking any other language besides English. And so for a year, maybe 3 days a week, I took a lesson with one particular teacher. Then COVID came. And when COVID came, I already knew I wanted to take more Spanish and emphasize it more so I can make greater improvement, but that really kind of sealed the deal. And I started taking more lessons. I branched out finally after 100 lessons with one professor. I branched out and started taking classes with other professors, and that really opened my mind. One question I was asked is, what was an aha moment for you with I-talki? For me, one aha moment was, you can take classes with different people and get different benefits from taking classes with different people. And so that was a very important moment for me, and I was nervous. But after a year practicing with one person, starting from the very, very beginning, how to pronounce letters, the very, very basics, lesson 1 out of so many lessons, very basic. After a year, I had enough confidence to at least engage a little bit with other people practicing Spanish and so forth. So over 2 years, it's maybe remarkable, I don't know, I've taken 1,500 hours of Spanish on I-talki. Again, I was in a moment of transition when I learned about I-talki. This is an image of my grandmother and I at Dodger Stadium, where the Oklahoma State Cowboys, it's the school I teach at now, happened to be in town, participating in Dodger Town Classic against the University of Michigan. I was in this time of transition. Living with my Puerto Rican grandmother, knowing I was going to be headed to a new state, a new place, a different culture, a different everything, for the first time living on my own. And looking back, I think one way I kind of kept connected to my family was through learning Spanish. And so that's an important part. I think it's important for us to think about what motivates us, because it's hard to learn a language and we do need motivation. Sometimes it's for survival, sometimes it's for work or for economic gain. Sometimes it's for family. It's always personal. And for me, it goes back to my family. So Oklahoma State University is where I teach now. And this is just an image of the library, Edmond Law Library, kind of taking us up to the present moment, because really it's been here when I moved to Oklahoma over the last 2 years. I started taking Spanish my last month in Los Angeles when I was staying with my grandmother for 6 months. Really, when I came to Oklahoma and I was living on my own for the first time in my life is where I have space, because believe me, no one likes listening to you take 4 or 5 Spanish lessons each day, believe me, okay? When I stayed with my mom and my stepfather, they were very gracious and gave me that space, but I know it's a little bit of a bear, when here we go again, here's Matt trying to talk Spanish, right? So I had space, I had my own place. It was a space that I filled up with learning Spanish with my I-talki teachers. So again, my first aha moment was you could take Spanish with many different people and receive many different benefits from those different people, those different teachers. So my first year from say June 2019 till about June 2020, I was taking only 3 lessons a week, so 3 hours a week with one person, but that was an excellent teacher. I will say that teacher costs more hourly than most teachers that I have been in these learning relationships with. But she was great, she was excellent. But I decided to basically stop taking classes with her because I couldn't afford taking classes with her if I wanted to take more classes with more people. And that was just that's just a brute fact of economics. And so I had to stop taking classes with her, and I'm super grateful for her. And I branched out. And by the time I get to August of 2020, you could see my schedule here. This is during my first week back to teaching. So I think this is a good kind of schedule to share because it gives you a sense of how I kind of manage my time. We'll take a closer look at my schedule because a couple questions I was asked to address have to do with how I timed my days and how I manage things like, a normal schedule and sleep and so forth. But right here, you can get a sense of my schedule early on. Just to say, you can see wherever you see this kind of, I guess, tan color maybe, those are Spanish lessons. And you can see how I start early. Here, whenever it's kind of this pinkish color, typically that's going to be when I'm working, teaching typically, and other engagements as well. We'll talk about that more when we go forward. So let me briefly talk about what is the I-talki Language Challenge. So the I-talki Language Challenge, honestly, I didn't know about it until it popped up on my I-talki page. And it's a challenge. It's a way that I-talki encourages people to compete, basically, to compete. You compete from, I think it's January 12th thereabouts until May, maybe 6th. So it's about, I don't know, I guess it's 7 weeks or so. And there's 2, and they keep tally of how many hours you've completed. And there's 2 boards. There's the overall board, top 10 finisher, top 10 people overall out of all languages. And you can see what language each person has taken and so forth. And then there's the other leader board of the top 10 people with the language that you happen to be taking. For me, it's Spanish. And so basically it's a way for those who are kind of competitive at heart. It's a way to kind of encourage them to be competitive and to use that competitive spirit in a positive way. And I'm competitive. I've always been competitive. I'm the middle brother of 3, so I'm naturally competitive. Ask my brothers. In a prior life, when I was 18, 19 years old and 20 years old, I actually competed in bodybuilding and won multiple bodybuilding competitions. And so it's always been kind of a part of me. So for me, this language challenge where it kind of encourages those who like to see how they're doing against others in a kind of a friendly competition way. That's what it's about in part, really. It's about that. And it's something that I really was drawn to, but I was also drawn to it because I was already doing quite a bit of Spanish. One question I was asked to respond to was, what was your daily schedule like during this I-talki challenge? And one thing I'll say is, it wasn't entirely different than what my schedule was before the I-talki challenge. So remember, the I-talki challenge was in January, in February, in the first week of March. If you look here in October, you could see, so I think I averaged about 5 hours a day on during the I-talki challenge, which came out to that 200 and something hours. It only got me third place, by the way. Some guy was studying Chinese and he like almost was gonna lap me. He did like 100 plus more hours anyhow. And that's, how did he do that? I don't know. For me, I work full time. I work a lot and I love my job. I'm very blessed to do that thing I've wanted to do for 20 years, and I've been doing it for 10, and I studied for 15, 20 prior to that. And I love my work. My work is my first priority. But I worked around that to construct a very kind of lively, almost immersion, if you will. That's one thing I noticed with my brother, Andrew. I mentioned Andrew learned Italian, and Andrew learned Italian. He's intelligent, like you all are, but he learned Italian because he was immersed in it, right? He fell in love with Romana, his wife, and he moved to Italy, and all his friends largely spoke Italian. His wife only spoke Italian. I don't have, a Spanish-speaking girlfriend. I'm single, and I'm not immersed. Everyone around me speaks English. But one thing I learned from watching my brother Andrew is if you're immersed in a language, you're going to learn it quicker. And so this was my form of immersion. Other things played a part in my form of immersion. Things that a lot of us do, using Netflix, listening to music, and doing some reading and other things outside of I-talki. But I-talki is the core, and it has been the core of my Spanish learning. And so what was my daily schedule like during the I-talki challenge? In some ways, it was very similar to what it was prior to the challenge. Here you can see in October of 2020, this is 2-3 months before the challenge, you could see I'm averaging pretty much 5 hours a day. You can see what other things are important to me. Religion 101.3, this is Introduction to World Religions. You can see those teaching hours there. You could see a Zoom meeting with one of my students. You could see a history department faculty meeting. You can see another meeting here with a student, Claire. Here is the class I teach, another class. So I taught 2 classes on Friday and Monday. And I also taught that class, by the way, here, some reason it's missing. And I taught a class on Thursday and on Tuesday at 4:30 to 5:45. Right in here, some reason it's missing, and here. And here is FIBSO crew. These are my friends, my close friends. It's kind of a code word, FIBSO. My friend's dad, Dan, taught in Patton. They're professors at other universities, but met back at graduate school, my closest friends. We had an hour and a half of Zoom conversation, hanging out together, which is important. I'll be seeing them in a couple of weeks in a cabin in Virginia, but that's another story. Here, you can see I scheduled very important. You've already seen images of my grandmother and I at Dodger Stadium, and the Dodgers happened to win the World Series this last year, and you better believe I was going to make time for that. So yeah, Spanish is important, but I work Spanish around other things that are important for me as well throughout my weekly life. I also make time for working out. I make time for other things, of course, that we all have to make time for. And I have to make time for beyond teaching, for preparing to teach, for grading and other tasks that are a part of, such as a faculty meeting here, our meeting with students are a part of my, my work. So it's important to plan ahead, and it's important to have a schedule. And for someone like me, I like schedule, I like routine, it works well. Another question in terms of the I-talki challenge, what was a question I don't like to think about, which was how much money do you spend or did you spend just on the I-talki challenge? So if I did, I think, what was it, 260 some classes on average, it depends on the teacher. And you could get teachers for $50, $60, $70 an hour, or you could get teachers for maybe $7, $8 an hour, which is probably more of a conversation than a structured class, and almost always. So you're not really, in some sense, I guess, without trying to say this in a negative way, it's you get what you pay for it in some sense, but not necessarily, right? There's some teachers that honestly could charge a lot more than they do, in my opinion, and they're worth it. But also, so for me, I would say, to try to answer this question directly, probably $3,000. One thing I recognize, and I've often said this almost all the time during my Spanish lessons, is how privileged I am. Yeah, especially during the pandemic, when many people have lost work, have found it hard to just even survive. I've been fortunate to be able to keep my job, and I don't make a lot of money, to be honest with you. I'm a professor of religious studies. Trust me, at a state university. Trust me, I'm not, sitting on a heap of money, but I make enough, and I'm fortunate enough, to have been employed throughout the pandemic. And I don't know. I think spending money, what people prioritize by maybe two things, right? One is look at their calendar. Like, what's on their calendar? How are they spending their time? Another way you might be able to kind of pinpoint what someone prioritizes is look at their bank account. Where are they spending their money? And you saw my calendar, and you saw how much of it went towards learning Spanish. Let me assure you, if you look at my bank account, trust me, the vast majority of my disposable income, it goes towards learning Spanish. And that's, for me, how do I justify it? I think each of us should justify how we spend our time and how we spend our money. And hopefully we spend our time and spend our money on things that matter to us. I justify it because it matters to me. To be honest, it's a family thing, but let me tell you, it's also about, at some point, not tomorrow, not in a year, maybe not in 2, maybe not 3, but maybe 4 or 5 years, I'll be fluent enough in Spanish, largely through my wonderful teachers I'm going to talk about in a second on I-talki, to do something good with it. I don't know what that looks like, but that's how I justify it. First, I'm drawn to it because it connects me to my family. Second, I know where I live in my location that I could use the Spanish language to do something good. For me, something good is probably going to be something around teaching. And what that looks like, I don't know. At the very least, it's going to look like probably teaching in a community center or maybe a church, teaching English to Spanish-speaking people who are coming from other countries, to make my home also their home. That would be a beautiful thing. That would be something that would be good to do, but also something that would connect me to my my own grandparents and their story. They did not immigrate because they came from a territory of the United States. So maybe we wouldn't call that immigration. But my grandfather and grandmother and my mother did come from a Spanish-speaking country, and they had to make their way. And for me, yeah, that yeah, that motivates me, and that's how I justify it. I know, I know, I would do something good. with the Spanish language. I know. And again, not tomorrow, not in a month, not in 3 years, maybe 5. 3 would be amazing. But I know I'll do something good by learning another language, because it opens up opportunities. It opens up ways of knowing others. It opens up possibilities to help others, to communicate with others. And that's how I justify, for me, and again, each of us has our own reason, but for me, that's how I justify spending time and spending money on the Spanish language, family, and the possibility of being able to connect with others and do something good with it. How do you find time to sleep? Let me tell you, that was another question posed to me. During the school year, I normally sleep on average probably 5 hours a day, which I'm not saying is the most healthy, but I could operate often on 5 hours of sleep, sometimes less, sometimes a little more. But here again, this is my schedule during the I-talki challenge, by the way. And you can see what it revolves around. It revolves around Spanish, right? But you can see my classes in here. And this was a 2-hour talk I participated on life after death with a fellow professor. It was pretty fun. And here is a pedagogical discussion, a discussion on teaching practices with people in my department. I'm in the Department of History. So I build everything else around that. And one thing to say, I mean, first, I am deeply passionate about learning the language, and it's more important than sleep to me, probably, but I do love sleep. And one thing to say about the schedule is you can see on Saturdays, I'm very content spending a Saturday doing preparation for my classes in the university and also doing a lot of Spanish. I find great joy in that, to be honest with you. So, so often what I would do is say, like when I ended the lesson here at about 11 o'clock, I would work until about 2 p.m., even 2 a.m. or 2:30 a.m. I would work on my job, my university work. And I would do it in other points throughout the week as well. So I keep a busy schedule, and and I like to keep a busy schedule. And if I didn't fill up with Spanish, I'd be filling it up with something else. Honestly, that time would be filled up with finishing a book manuscript, which probably I should have finished. But I decided, you know what? I'm gonna finish that book manuscript this summer. But I decided I was tired of waiting to learn a language I've been wanting to learn for decades. So I made time for it. And yeah, sleep, I found time to sleep. I could have slept more, honestly, but I honestly don't need a lot of sleep for whatever reason. So yeah, the good news is, to be honest, the weekends are really important. On the weekends, I could delight in taking 7 or 8 hours of Spanish. A lot of that isn't just like grammar. My key teachers, they really put me to task, and I'm gonna talk about them in a second. But a lot of these are basically conversations. These are me trying to make mistakes and make a lot of mistakes. It's also me listening, asking questions, and trying to listen and pick up that ear for listening to Spanish. So not all these times are very intensive, and they're varied. And that's really important, I think, that you want to have different professors who teach you different ways, or some who don't really teach you at all, who really are there for a Spanish conversation partner, which is really important to have. You need to have that. It can't just be straight lessons. You need to have time just to like listen and try to figure out how to speak and communicate with whatever limited vocabulary and understanding of grammar and pronunciation you have. The good thing I have to say, I finished third in the I-talki challenge, is that if it went on like even a day longer, I think I would have slipped quickly down the rankings because starting March 7th, and I think the I-talki challenge ended March 6th. Starting March 7th, I had to teach a weekend class at the university for 7.5 hours on Sunday and Saturday. And that happened for over the course of, I think, 30 weekends. And so that surely would have done me in if the I-talki challenge was scheduled even maybe a week later into March. So really the weekends are important to me. Sometimes on the weekends, usually because of COVID, I was staying in. But one of my dear friends and his family was kind of like my little bubble group, and we would hang out in his backyard. He's a professor in philosophy. And I remember he'd invite me over to have time with him and his lovely wife and Tanya and their 2 kids. And it'd be in the backyard, and it'd be for a certain amount of time. And then I'd say, you know what? It's 7 o'clock. I have a Spanish lesson. I gotta go. And so that's the kind of thing, like, I really try to build my schedule around my Spanish lessons, my work, and other things that are important to me in my working out, and my friends too, but within limits, doing so, and family, of course. So in terms of what value do you feel you get out of taking I-talki lessons? Is it just the Spanish learning, or is there much more? Wow. Whew. I mean, I have been surprised by how much more it has been than just learning conjugations, learning different tenses and vocabulary. It's, you know what it's like. Anyone who has undertaken learning a language, it's so much more. Especially the way I have been and continue to learn through having these classes, hours of classes. Here's a picture of Edma, who I've had 130 hours of Spanish, I think, with. And I could name others. I'm gonna walk through in a few others with you. And what Edma has taught me has gone way beyond the Spanish language. It's been the Spanish language, and she's an energetic, demanding teacher. Edma is from Venezuela, but now lives here in Santa Cruz in the Canary Islands, which is part of Spain. A beautiful island. And she's shared with me about Venezuela, and she's shared with me about the Canary Islands and about so many other things. I mean, often when you walk through articles that you read together and you discuss the grammar, the vocabulary, and the meaning of these texts themselves are meaningful and interesting, and they bring up other questions and points of discovery. But the amount of culture, the amount of history, the amount of stuff that I've learned, both beautiful and complicated, about whether it be from what's happening politically, or from the beautiful cultures, or learning about the indigenous people of these different countries that are predominantly Spanish speaking. All of it has been amazing. It has really, really given me a deep appreciation for just the richness of culture, history, life, food within these different Spanish-speaking countries. From the Canary Islands in Spain to Venezuela. I've had classes with students from all over the place. What got you hooked on taking I-talki lessons was another question. That was kind of an abrupt change, but I think the teachers got me hooked. I'm going to talk about some of the other teachers. This is an image of Rhaenyra Maria Rilke. I remember one day, Edma and I, who I just showed a picture of, and Emma is great. She's a passionate teacher. All of my core teachers, who I've had 100 classes with and more, are all professional teachers. They're educated, but also they're passionate about teaching. Like, they care about their students, and that's really important. And Edma, like me, is a passionate person, and somehow we stumbled upon a conversation about love, and she didn't appreciate my take on how I understood love and the way I was applying it. And she said to me, it's in Hustel, it's in Hustel. And knows Hustel. I was like, what is Hustel? Is this? It's not being just, right? And it was the first time I learned that word. And often I remember learning words in these contexts of conversations with my teachers. And then in response, I found a letter. It's letter 7 from Rainier Maria Rilke, and it's letters to a young poet. And in this letter, which I've read many times, he talks about love, but I found it in Spanish. And I sent it to her. And of course, being Edma, she read it through, and it was complicated Spanish, right? Spanish translated from Rilke's, I believe, German. I read it in English and originally, and into Spanish, and it's complicated, beautiful. We had a conversation about that. It's the relationships with the professors that has hooked me into I-talki. It's the amount of care, the amount of preparation, the amount of what they expect out of me, the amount of them like wanting me to improve, right? That has really hooked me into I-talki. Here's just an example of there's so many different modalities, different ways that my core teachers have taught me. But here's an example of a recent article that we spent a few days talking about millennials and returning home after living in another country. It's not as easy as it might seem. And so this is a very interesting article, right? It's about what happens when someone leaves their home country and spends time in another country, and that kind of reverse culture shock that might occur. So this would be one of the articles, and many, many different articles I've read with students. Another core professor is Melissa Rivera. She also works, as most of my Spanish teachers do, work in other, have other jobs outside of their busy life as online Spanish teachers. She also works as, I think it's called like a copyright editor, and she's really into marketing and writing and editing, and she's a freelancer. She has a website with different companies she's worked on, and she really takes that skill of copy editing and of being very kind of committed on focusing on grammar, and she applies that to her way of teaching as well. So Melissa, just briefly, if I may, is from Lima, Peru. Here's the image of Lima, Peru. And this is how, with Melissa, how we kind of walk through our classes. With Melissa, with Edma, it's going to be conversation. And with Edma, we work on different grammar points. We use videos, we use articles. I showed you one article, and we talk about Rainier Maria Rilke, and we've used textbooks, all different things. And then with Melissa, what we do is start with a conversation, and she writes down my mistakes, which are, as you can see, plenty. They always have been, probably will be for a super long time to go. And then we review them together. Again, with Melissa, I do other things, but this is one of our primary tasks, is having a conversation, then reviewing it afterwards, step by step. You can see here, this is class 98. So you can imagine, now we're in class, I think 115 or so. You can imagine spending, 100 plus hours having conversation and walking through what you said and what you should have said. And she's really good at, being engaged in conversation. She's really good with her keyboard, and you don't even know it, but as she's talking with you, she's, writing down her mistakes. This has been really helpful. And honestly, I'm amazed that I keep making the same mistakes. But often my mistakes are small. It's like the gender, or it's missing a word. And in some ways that's strangely encouraging that you are almost there, right? And so Edma, Melissa, two excellent teachers who I have a deep respect for, and who both expect me to come prepared. right? And that's really important. There's other teachers you can have, and you can just have conversation, and they're not going to put a tons of emphasis, and that's fine. And it's good to have those type of teachers, because sometimes you should have people that you just like talk with, and you make mistakes. You're making mistakes. They're not correcting them, but you don't care because you're using that time just to practice the flow of having conversation, right? On I-talki, or whatever it happened to be. So again, just giving a close up, going through some of the work over these hours that I've done with Melissa. Anna also, she's also from Peru, coincidentally. I've had classes again with people from Peru, Honduras, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Chile, many from Colombia, Venezuela, one from Argentina more recently, and wow, that's been fun. And their Spanish is a little bit different for me, but I enjoy taking classes with people from different countries, because of course you get different accents, but for me, really what you get is you get different cultures, you get different histories, you learn different things about the different people from those different cultures and different histories and countries. Peru, for example, the indigenous people, the peoples of Peru, is remarkable. Likewise in Colombia, I recently taught a class on the religions of the Native Americans. So here in my home country, the United States, and it's been really neat that my professors have picked up on that, and how they brought in, knowing that I'm interested in that subject, the traditions of indigenous people and so forth, and have brought that into some of our lessons has been wonderful as well. So Anna is an exceptional teacher. She is a very caring teacher, and she's very good at listening, and like all my teachers, very good at listening, and they speak really clearly, which is really important, and they're all encouraging in their own way. They're all, different too, I'll say, which is a good thing, With Anna, I would say one thing that we've worked a lot on, and by the way, Anna's from Trujillo, Peru. This, I remember one class she shared with me about this main square and about the importance of these squares or plazas throughout South America. It's beautiful. But with Anna, one thing that we work on a lot is pronunciation. And I love the articles. Usually they're like one-page articles about different topics. I remember when the first topics about a year ago was on manifestaciones, or protests. And it was about, people mobilizing to do manifestaciones or protests. And that was the first time I learned that word, and an important word. And there's been all kinds of interesting articles. I remember around Christmas time, we had an article on the different practices and customs of Peru. One being, I believe, what would translate as one part of Peru to have a celebration around the Black Jesus, which I thought was super interesting. Another part of Peru during Christmas time, they eat, I guess what you'd call a guinea pig or hamster of sorts. Is it cuyo? I forget the word, apologies. And just so interesting. I've seen different documentaries about indigenous people, people in some of these different countries. All of it's fascinating stuff, fascinating. With Anna, one thing that she's helped me out, I would say more than anyone, is pronunciation. Why? Because 1 out of every 3 or 4 classes, which are typically based around a document and going at it from different ways, the very first class, we walk through and I'll read aloud each paragraph. And she'll listen, and then she will have me repeat words, which is could sound tedious, right? But also it's very important, very important. It's hard work. It takes patience. It takes patience for any teacher to do that, to sit with you, listen carefully, and to encourage you to pronounce words correctly. That's an important thing. And so I really rely upon Anna for that aspect. For Edma for aspects related to grammar and different forms of engagement with with Melissa, again, aspects related to grammar as well. Each of them works on with everything, but also each of them has their own strengths as well, which combined have helped me out tremendously. At the end of each lesson with Anna, Anna provides me, you can see here, it says clase numero ciento, ciento 14, lo siento para mi blunder. You can see these are words that I said incorrectly, and below are words I might have not known, are corrections. Again, she provides me with corrections. I said, no había mucho tiempo. Rose me, yo no tenía mucho tiempo. I said, tuve que empacar las cajas de plástica. She said, tuve que empacar las cajas de plástico. Yeah, not too bad, getting there. But this is the type of stuff. This is the type of stuff you cannot get off of an automated machine. You cannot get in any other way. You cannot even get in a classroom when a teacher has 30 students. You only get this level of care and instruction when it's one-on-one. And for me, it's been through I-talki. And recently, during the I-talki challenge, I already had my core teachers. And I'll continue to work with. I have classes scheduled. I usually schedule 2 months in advance. And I do that for a couple of reasons. One, it helps set my schedule. I'm a very schedule-driven person. And over the summer, I'm going to be doing a lot of publishing and research related to my field, which is the history of Christianity. But I want to make sure I'm having at least 3 classes a day balanced within my schedule. And so I already have mapped out my classes for the next 2 months. And those 3 are part of that schedule. And Laura is part of that schedule. Laura Lopez, I met relatively recently, actually during the I-talki challenge. With Laura Lopez is a gifted teacher. I think out of my teachers, she's the one that doesn't have the formal education in teaching Spanish as a language, but she does aspire to being a teacher in a medical school. Right now, she lives in Cali. There's a panoramic photo of Cali in Colombia, and she's studying to be a medical doctor. I remember after one of our lessons, I wanted her to know, you are an excellent teacher. Is this this isn't your profession, right? You're a medical student. She said, yeah, but I hope to actually teach medicine. And I could see that. She's an extremely gifted teacher, as are the other 3 as well. And one thing interesting is that during the I-talki challenge, I was really trying to find just more conversation partners, because Edma, Melissa, Anna, they push me enough in a focused way where I don't need more like focused kind of lessons probably. But to my surprise, when I started taking classes with Laura Lopez, she was really good at kind of seeing what level I was at. And I've never tested what level. I suppose I'm probably 1B after 2 years and 1,500 hours. I don't know, but I'm at that level, which a lot of people get to. And it's that level of having to learn subjunctives, right? And yeah, I've been working on that a lot with her. And she's really good at knowing where you're at and what you need to kind of work at, and she's kind of situated herself along that trajectory along with my other professors in a very useful way. She brings in, like my other professors do, cultural stories, other moments that are important to the people of Colombia. Here, she's talking about the celebration, a party that they have culturally on her 15th year. And she was using different tenses, a lot of kind of subjunctive past tenses and other tenses as well. And this is the kind of work we do. We walk through it. It takes time. This takes, this is like a 20-minute thing, probably, just kind of walking through this together. More recently, one thing I really enjoy is being aware of what's happening outside of my bubble, which is the United States. And few people have helped me more than my teachers, helped me more like look beyond the borders of what's happening in my state or in my life or in my country. And they've done this in so many ways. And just give you one example, and I could give many, thinking about my teacher in Ecuador, Allison, what she shared with me about the life in Ecuador, in Venezuela, and what's occurring in Venezuela, and the issues around the necessity for many Venezuelans to migrate out of Venezuela into Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and being aware of those issues and trying to learn about those issues by reading Spanish newspapers. All that comes out of conversations with my I-talki professors. Recently, and perhaps you might be aware of this, due to an unjust tax that was levied against the middle class of Colombia recently by the government, there's been protests. And I remember when this started, the protest, the epicenter of the protest initially was in Cali, Colombia. And I remember having a class with Laura, and she was sharing with me that things are getting kind of crazy. And and all of this she's saying in Spanish. All my teachers are good. They all speak English better than I speak Spanish by far, but they're all very good at not showing that off because they know what's important is me learning Spanish. So they speak in Spanish to me almost all the time. And so she was sharing with me in Spanish about from the beginning of the protest to the whole process. To one point, she couldn't go to the bank and access money because it was shut down, to the helicopters above, to not being able to get eggs because of lines at the grocery store. Here she is, a medical student living with her abuelita, her grandmother, and they're down to cans of tuna during the protest. I remember at the end of one conversation, she shared with me, very kind of personal stuff revolved around her perspective during this moment. And I remember she ended the conversation by saying, Tingle Faith, I have faith. And that really stuck with me. And then I went on to read more about the protests in Colombia. I ended up sharing about it on Facebook. I would have known nothing about it if it wasn't for conversation with Laura. There's so many things. That's one story. There's so many stories like that that I could share with you, how my world has been broadened, how it's been enriched beyond learning conjugations through many, many classes, one-on-one with professors on I-talki. And I'm super grateful for them. This brings me to the end, and there's so much more that I could say because I'm very passionate about learning Spanish, and I'm very passionate and very grateful for my my teachers, and it's to them that I dedicate this talk. Here is a picture of old San Juan. Yesterday, I was in old San Juan because one of my great aunts lives in San Juan, and I was visiting my primos and primas, my cousins, who last time I saw them, I was 8 years old. It was hot that day, and we walked around some, and we had wonderful food and conversation. I spoke Spanish the whole time. Not perfectly. One of my primos is actually a professor of Spanish literature in a university in Atlanta, basically, in that area. And he was there because it was his mother's home, and a few other cousins. And one cousin said, you speak Spanish well. And well, it's not that good, but I appreciate that. And I know that for me, it hasn't come easy. It's come through many hours, as you can see, but it's also come through the commitments, not just my commitments, but the commitments of my professors. And so now, just to kind of close it off, tomorrow, just to say, I'll be taking my rental car an hour and 10 minutes out of San Juan, which is the capital of Puerto Rico, to a farming town, if you will, called Utuado. Utuado is where my grandmother was raised. It's where my grandfather met my grandmother after he came as a baby from Cuba to Puerto Rico. It's where my family has its roots. And I started off by saying, what motivates me are two things. One, my love of family and a recognition of those roots. I mean, another thing would be a love of language, going back to learning Greek and Latin in graduate school, but never spoke them. And of course, wanting to do something good with it. But the roots, I started with talking about what motivates me, what animates my desire to learn Spanish. It's about familia. It's about my family. Yeah, it's exciting to think about visiting Utuado tomorrow for the first time that I can recall. I was there when I was 8. My family in the past, my extended family had farms up here. This is a dam up there that was constructed, I think, in the middle of the 20th century. I hope I do not have to cross that bridge because I'm really scared of heights, and that looks beautiful, but also a little bit frightening. But one thing I will see, and I hope to avoid this bridge, will be here. I had a conversation with my grandmother on Mother's Day, which extended almost 3 hours. And when she gave me a list of things I need to see when I'm in Puerto Rico. And one thing she mentioned was the church that my grandfather and my grandmother were married at here in Utuado, Puerto Rico. So I'm looking forward to that. So all of this, I will have to say, like this adventure with learning Spanish and the love that I started with has only grown over the time. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge. It's, I don't know, for me, it's the hardest thing I've ever tried to do, and I'm still trying to do it. But I know I'm going to get there because of my deep passion for it, my deep sense of purpose, and also because I am fortunate to have excellent teachers who are consistently there, encouraging, pushing, and yeah, and being present with me, honestly, day in and day out. So yeah, so that's it. That's how I took 260 some hours of Spanish from I-talki, and how and why I've taken it. And it's really about that relationship that one could have with your professors. I'll say I've had over 50 plus different teaching conversation partners on I-talki, and there's many more I could have mentioned who are quite good. But I wanted to mention some of those core teachers that I continue to work with in the limited time I had for this talk. So thank you so much. Thank you for being with me, and I wish you all the best in your learning of Spanish or learning of another language. And I just hope that whatever the reason it is, that you have a good reason for doing it, and I hope you'll be able to do good with it, with your acquisition of another language. All right, so thank you so much. All right, take care.